Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, February 19th, 2020. Ooh, a 1920 thing. 1920. Tomorrow, I guess, will be 2/20/20. So that'll be fun, too. We'll note that when the proper time comes, which is about 24 hours from now, as it happens. Things being relatively constant in our part of the universe. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Equally constant is the attention we get each morning from Bill in Portland, Maine, who notes for us today that I will be noting on today's show that the Boy Scouts just declared bankruptcy. I actually did notice that yesterday. We got an email. Our sons, our remaining Scout sons troop emailed yesterday to say, we're having our meeting as usual despite the bankruptcy, so make sure you show up today. So I did get to see that one. But yeah, the Boy Scouts just declared bankruptcy, while the Girl Scouts, as it turns out, continue making money hand over fist as smart, honest, resourceful, inclusive, generous, ethical entrepreneurs. Just saying. That's a good point, Bill. Definitely true. Is that part? That should be part of the Girl Scout oath, right? A Girl Scout is smart, honest, resourceful, inclusive, generous, ethical, and entrepreneurial. I don't know. Maybe it is part of their oath. I have no idea. Okay. That's true. That's up there and out there. And lots more, of course, to talk about today. Today being Wednesday means we have the benefit of having Greg Dworkin remind us of what the hell we're supposed to be paying attention to. I imagine you'll all want to talk about many things today. The Boy Scouts bankruptcy being one of them. By the way, as a parent of an active scout who's constantly having to pay for this, that, and the other thing, or being asked to donate for this, that, or the other thing, it's hard to believe that they're bankrupt. But as I understand it, I heard in passing, I did ask, why the hell are they bankrupt again? And I think it's apparently legal settlements from all of their various problems of various sorts. So interesting. I think they're, I guess the story is that they're set to reorganize and come out of bankruptcy, but they need to do this for whatever legal reason. So that would be a hell of a thing. To have the Boy Scouts just close up shop while there's a bunch of kids working toward their Eagle Scout rank, etc. What a tragedy that would be. It really would be. All right. Well, anyway, since I don't know anything about that one, we'll move on to other stories which are more important to you, which I also either don't know anything about or can't explain. How about that for the day? For instance, many of you would have spent the latter part of yesterday bug-eyed and wondering about the latest raft of pardons that have been issued by the idiot president. And I see a lot of people doing the same thing, scratching their head and wondering about it and trying to think if there's any sort of unifying strategy or reason behind it. And I guess it's just not for us to understand, because most people are just coming to the conclusion that I've seen various attempts at explanation, but most people are just coming basically to the conclusion that he just wants to show that he can do whatever he wants. Some theories out there that he's pardoning either personal friends or people who have had friends of theirs sponsor big-time fundraisers for Trump or made large donations and then bent the president's ear about a pardon. All of this is probably true and possibly the reason. There's also, there's a bunch of other theories out there. As a matter of fact, David Neer, both David and Hunter tweeted something interesting about it. One, David tweeted about Blagojevich, saying he was literally impeached and removed from office in a unanimous vote when he was governor of Illinois, and barred from ever holding state office again. And maybe this is Trump's way of saying F you to the very idea of impeachment. That's worth considering. Hunter had commented that he said yesterday a list of former DOJ officials calling on Barr to resign topped 2,000, as we mentioned, and the Federal Judges Association, also mentioned on yesterday's show, announced an emergency meeting. We didn't get the results of that yet, too. Let's see if we can cast about for word on what happened. Although I imagine if something big had happened, it would have made a splashy headline. But today, meaning yesterday, Trump pardoned a list of the most famously corrupt figures in recent history. Just sort of perhaps, as he says in the second tweet here, I do wonder if the timing is intentional. The Trump administration telling those judges and the DOJ that they do not matter anymore. Hold your emergency meetings and your trials, but Trump can nullify them whenever he wants. That, too, a possibility. Let's see. Third, I noticed Renato Mariotti, who is not a member of the Daily Kos staff, but pointing out, to begin with, that his former boss, Patrick Fitzgerald, whose name you will remember from years past, Patrick Fitzgerald, in addition to conducting a bunch of high-profile prosecutions for the DOJ, came out to represent his good friend James Comey when he got into was threatened with legal trouble, I guess. But it's also noted here that Patrick Fitzgerald in the past had spent his professional time prosecuting people like Scooter Libby, Conrad Black, and Rod Blagojevich, all of whom have so far received pardons or commutations from Trump, as if he were somehow saying he was angry with James Comey and therefore angry with anybody who would help James Comey and therefore would somehow punish them by, I don't know, pardoning criminals that they had put in jail, as though, I doubt very much really whether Patrick Fitzgerald is walking around saying, my life is ruined now, my life's work down the tubes. He might even be angry. Maybe he's just plain puzzled and, hasn't got much to say about it and probably won't. But lots of interesting competing theories as to why he would have pardoned those people in particular. I guess I'll note one more for the record before we get on board here with Greg. I noticed that Caitlin Collins, tweeting for CNN, or I guess tweeting as in her role as CNN White House reporter, Trump says he relies on recommendations when deciding on who to pardon. Of course he does, because he has no idea, what to do with the power, or who's sentenced to commute. Per the White House, they actually admit this stuff. Those who factored into today's decisions, yesterday's, include Sheldon Adelson, Maria Bartiromo, or Bartiromo, is it Bartiromo? I don't know. I don't watch Fox News. That's where she lives. Rudy Giuliani, always dependable. Elaine Chao, I wonder how she got so influential. Andrew Napolitano. Eddie Gallagher, one of the people he just pardoned not that long ago over his murder charges. And Mike Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell. And apparently there's a lot more input into that, too. And basically it comes from whatever he sees on television. And there you have it. So let's bring Greg in. Let's acknowledge Greg's presence and allow him to speak now and uninterrupted until he finally decides he's had enough. Good morning, Greg.
Hi, good morning. You can try to interrupt me, but I don't know that I'll
do my
let
best.
You. I mean, that's normal standard operating procedure. Right. So as long as we're talking about the pardons, I think we should also include Paul Waldman.
Okay, has he been
who has
pardoned?
A column that he would have been very profane about, but as he wrote on Twitter, I can't really use the title I wanted to because it's a family paper. Meh. But he essentially writes, why is he doing this? More than that, Trump is really after the normalization of corruption. The fact that Blago is a Democrat makes it all the better. Mm-hmm. Trump would never argue that Republicans are clean and Democrats are dirty. He wants to convince you that everybody's dirty. And in fact, it's a key part of his reelection strategy. They all stink. They all cheat. So what? I'm using the Russians to win another election, so what? They all do it. They would do it if they could. I'm just doing it because I'm better at it than they are. Yeah. That's basically his reelection strategy.
That could be. I have my questions about it. I imagine that most people at the Trump rallies just don't know who any of those people are anyway. But if they do, I guess now's the time for them to change their
Trump
minds and say, those people are awesome. I love when they cheat me and ruin my mortgage or whatever. If Ken Lay were alive, they'd be pardoning him, too. And I imagine Bernie Madoff is next.
I'm going to lose the farm over his trade war. I love him.
Yeah, right. So it doesn't really make any sense, but okay. They'll overcome it, I'm sure.
Right. So we have primary stuff. We have a big debate tonight. This one I might actually watch.
Okay.
Because I want to see everybody go after Bloomberg when they should be going after Bernie, but they won't. And Bernie's actually doing incredibly well. A whole raft, a whole box crate of polling for you this morning.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
But as my friend Jack Kimball, the satirical representative Jack Kimball, says on Twitter today, a lot of those horrible videos that people are digging up from Bloomberg aren't even from 2020. And if they are, they're from like January, so not the last 2 weeks.
That's so Jack Kimball, our satire.
Yeah, our satire, exactly. So big poll out this morning. There was the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which we'll get to. But Democratic primary preference this morning among leaned Democrats, because Democrats lean, right? We're not straight up. We tend to lean one way or the other.
I see.
Democratic primary at a glance. Bernie Sanders, 32, soaring to a big lead. Biden crashing to 17 in second. And Bloomberg rising to 14 in third. Elizabeth Warren, 11 in fourth.
Who?
And Pete Buttigieg, 7, and Amy Klobuchar, 6. So those are the big 6. Apparently, NBC Wall Street Journal poll only had room to poll 5 people.
Yeah.
So they had a thing yesterday. They were looking at head-to-heads where Bernie was crushing Bloomberg head-to-head, but they didn't have Bernie against Elizabeth Warren because the pollster said they only had room for 5 people. So they chose Klobuchar.
Yes, that was very interesting, wasn't it?
And it wasn't because Mark Murray or the commentators are anti-Elizabeth and refused to talk about her. Her number wasn't there. I mean, it was in the poll, but not in the head-to-heads. So there's this thing where Elizabeth Warren supporters write in that say she's being erased.
Yes.
Which is interesting. Is it true? Is it not true? I mean, this is one of those glaring things that gives fuel to that. But the fact is that she's in 4th place or 3rd place, but usually 4th, sometimes 5th. Mm-hmm. And the reason that she's trailing in commentary is because she's trailing in the polls.
Yes.
And with Nevada coming up quickly, we shall see what happens. By the way, for those who want to look at delegates, Bernie's also got a projected big delegate lead. And the fact is that California, which is an enormous state with a lot of delegates, 600,000 people in California have already voted.
Yes.
That's more than Iowa and New Hampshire combined.
Oh, well, that's a good point. That is very interesting.
We won't know what it is for years, but they have voted.
We won't know about Iowa for years.
Yeah, well, we'll probably find out about California before we find out about Iowa.
Maybe.
Iowa released a whole new set of numbers, which is supposed to be the official final numbers, but you know what? Nobody cares. So I think the main thing there is get rid of the caucuses. And we'll see how Nevada does. They're cautiously optimistic about their just released new software and iPads trying to help people catch up.
All right.
And a lot of people, there was early voting, so there's a pretty big early voting surge as well.
Yep.
So all of that is in the bank. And now we go to the Saturday caucus, and then we'll see if we can make heads or tails of it. But there was also an important NPR PBS Marist poll yesterday. And the reason it was important, it was because Bloomberg got his 10% or more. And although Bernie led the field, the story there was Bloomberg actually makes the debates, which are tonight. And so people get a chance to, wail on him if they want.
I guess so.
Sanders had 31. Next closest contender was 19. And that 19 second place rival was Mike Bloomberg. So I feel justified spending Monday talking about Bloomberg because he's a thing, at least for now.
Yes.
Until or unless he fades. Now,
all right.
I'm going to preface this discussion with a description of a cartoon.
This. Okay.
And I can't show you the cartoon because we're like on podcast, you know. But I'll
show them.
David the image.
I get to see it.
You get to see it.
It's hilarious.
It's a thinly veiled metaphor about voting, and it shows a sinking ship. One day in the middle of the ocean, oh crud, our boat is sinking. We're in great peril indeed.
Yes.
Because people really talk like that in real life, right?
Yeah, I do.
But the captain says, we're going to be okay, everyone, and just get in this life raft. And the passengers look at it and say, is that the only life raft? And the captain says, yes, but it's big enough for all of us. And one of the other passengers says, well, it looks uncomfortable. I don't like the color. Guys, it's not important right now. The boat's sinking. Well, I don't feel like getting in a raft today. Don't you have a raft that we like better? Look, this is serious, okay? If we don't get in the raft, we're all going to drown. Well, what if we don't like those options? I'm not really feeling this rescue. In fact, to protest our unsatisfactory choices, let's untie the raft and let it go. And so they do, and so they drown. And so, is that the Democratic primary right now? For a lot of us who have to choose between the narrative, not the reality, we'll get to the reality, but the narrative of Jeremy Corbyn versus Charles Foster Kane, and that's our choice, it don't feel great.
I don't like it.
I don't like it, but It is what it is. Now, how are things actually going? Well, as a matter of fact, I'm so glad you asked.
How are things
interesting
going?
result in this poll. Bernie Sanders is beating Joe Biden and Mike Bloomberg in the ABC Washington Post poll this morning among moderates.
Moderates. Oh, okay.
And 20% of the adults think Sanders is too conservative.
Oh.
Which
right.
I read that
sure
and I said,
that?
wait, what? How could that be? And then my friend C.D. Hooks reminded me exactly how that can be.
How could that be? Who did this?
Okay.
Who reminded me?
Be? Right, exactly. C.D. Hooks, who is in Texas, reminds us with a tweet, can people drink a Coke and then shoot the empty can with a gun department? Bernie Sanders is a moderate safely in line with heartland values, and Mike Bloomberg is a radical on the far left of the party.
All right. You know what? Let's do it that way.
Yeah.
Why not?
So why not? But, there's some truth in that. Remember, Mike Bloomberg in every town, you can argue about why he is the way he is. Is he putting his money where he wants to support later? I don't know. But a big, very big gun safety funder. And so there are people all over the country, in fact, who look at him like that.
Yeah.
Now, not necessarily in the Democratic Party, but in the Republican Party. And so it's just an interesting concept to wrestle with as we remember that people are complicated, particularly voters. And if they think Sanders is too conservative, that's what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's grounds for that on the gun issue as well.
Yeah. So what else do we find? Sanders' newfound 15-point lead over Biden nearly doubles Biden's biggest lead of the campaign, 8 points over Sanders in early September. And the most dramatic shifts aren't in vote preferences, but in views of who has the best chance to defeat Trump in November. Electability has been a cornerstone of Biden's campaign, but only 19% now say he's likeliest to win, sliced in half, and 38% in January. And 30% of lean Democrats now see Sanders as the most electable, up 12 points. So if you think Bernie has the best chance of defeating Trump, then that's going to drive a lot of this. And interestingly, in the general election matchups, head-to-head, 52-45 for Biden, 51-45 for Sanders. That's a pretty good Bernie number there. Yeah. Bloomberg is 50-45, 49-46 Buttigieg, who I would contend people still don't know who he is. And same with Klobuchar, 48-46, and Warren, 48-47. So I'm sorry to tell Elizabeth Warren voters, if I had to choose any of them at this particular point in time and I had to make a choice, I'd probably cast a ballot for Warren. But she's not doing well.
Yeah.
And so, part of the erasure is simply because she's not doing well.
That does tend to contribute.
It's not a conspiracy to erase her. She's not doing as well, so we're going to cover these others. Now, that in and itself drives stuff, but she did have her time in the sun. She had her spotlight, and arguably she didn't make most of it.
That could be, yeah.
Now, Trump retains two dubious distinctions in the morning's ABC Washington Post poll. He's the first president in modern polling never to have achieved majority approval, and his career average rating is the lowest on record. He's at a new low in approval among Democrats at 4%, a high among Republicans at 88%. And for the widest partisan gap since he took office, he's got 46% approval among independents, often a swing group in national politics, although Rachel Bidikofer would say yes, but there's not that many of them because everybody's pretty much made up their mind.
All right.
Yeah. 26% of Americans say his behavior as president has changed for the worse since his acquittal of impeachment charges last month. 50% among Democrats, 3% of Republicans, and independents somewhere between the two. Okay. So Sanders wins 46% support among chiefly focused on issues, and that drops to 21% among the majority that cares more about defeating Trump. So Sanders still has a lot of work to do in terms of getting the rest of the party to believe he can actually win.
Okay.
But he doesn't have a problem within the Democratic ranks based on his self-definition as a democratic socialist. Doesn't bother people. Doesn't bother Democrats. It bothers the electorate. We'll get to that. A third of all adults call Sanders too liberal. A quarter say that about Biden and Bloomberg. 20% call Sanders too conservative. So labels are labels. Americans are more apt to oppose than support single payer, 52-41. And in voter intention among all adults, less likely rather than more likely to support Sanders by 31-11, given the Democratic Socialist label, and 38-8 as a socialist. The share saying it makes no difference drops to half. So he's got to convince people that it doesn't matter. He still wins the head-to-heads, his camp would argue, but there's a lot left in the election. So this second poll here, and this one is from PBS, so NPR, I'm thinking it's Marist. Sanders rises, but socialism isn't popular with most Americans.
Oh.
Okay. Right. Asked about their impression of socialism, only about a quarter of Americans, 28%, said they had a favorable view, while 6 in 10, 58%, said they had an unfavorable view. If socialism is so unpopular, how can Sanders be on the rise in the Democratic primary? Because Democrats, and more specifically progressives, view socialism favorably. Half of Democrats said that. 2/3 of progressives did, but only 23% of independents and 7% of Republicans. It's unpopular nationally. Views of socialism grow more unfavorably the older the generation, but even 50% of Gen Z and millennials had an unfavorable view as opposed to 38% who had a favorable one. And this is the key to me and why I worry about the House. Suburban voters who have been trending with Democrats are overwhelmingly against it, 27-61.
Whatever it is.
Whatever socialism is, we don't like it.
Right.
Okay. But Sanders in this poll and others does beat President Trump in a head-to-head match at 48-45. That's something his campaign and surrogates are eager to point out, which is true. And Warren is the top second choice, but mostly as Sanders supporters.
Okay.
And most of those, or many of those who list her as the second choice are already Bernie people, so she's not going to get them. And that is a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're trying to win.
Oh, so, yes, right. That, well, other than that.
Here's another one. This is from Morning Consult. How the Democratic Socialist label is playing in the 2020 presidential race. And, again, not so well. 45% of voters 18 to 29 said Sanders self-identifies as a Democratic Socialist compared to 78% of voters 65 and older. In other words, if you're older than 65, you damn well know Bernie's a Democratic Socialist.
Yeah, all right.
36% of Democratic primary voters said the socialist label makes it more likely they'll vote for him. 36%. That's not a majority. The front runner.
No, just for more likely.
Right. Older voters more likely to identify him as such. So at least, will the label stay? Yeah, the label's going to stick because it is. I mean, it's correct and people know it's correct. And again, makes the observation, it's not a barrier for the Democratic primary. The Democratic primary is not in that sense the real world because it doesn't reflect what happens in the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. Now, good thing, I guess, from a progressive perspective is that because Bernie's the front runner, he has pushed virtually everybody Overton window style to the left, including more moderate candidates. You saw that when everybody raised their hand, mistakenly or not, about getting rid of private insurance in the very first debate, right. Which we all said was a mistake at the time. And guess what? It was a mistake. But it's just an example of that. And this particular story uses the example of Bloomberg, who's walked back previous viewpoints on Wall Street where he made his fortune with a set of proposals released Tuesday that would strengthen bank regulation and tax individual financial transactions. So, again, we made the point on Monday that there are analysts who say the thing about Bloomberg, just like Bernie, is that they would be constrained by the heart of the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. You can't go too far left or too far right because Democrats won't let you. And unlike Trump, who could lead his cult anywhere he wants, they can't replicate that on the Democratic side. There is no Democratic Trump. The dynamics are different. It's a completely different party. It's a coalition rather than a single payer brand of we all want the same thing, which is winning and nothing else, which is what you have on the Republican side.
Yes.
So they got in the lifeboat and then sold the boat.
Okay. Yes.
Right?
Right.
So that's that. Another fascinating poll this morning is from Pew. As economic concerns recede, environmental protection rises on the public's policy agenda. So if Bernie and the Democrats are smart, they'll also pivot to that, not just the economy. Economy is 67. Environment is 64. Climate change 52. These are all-time high numbers for these issues. And the third behind in economy and environment is a deficit at 53. So deficit and climate change tie, economy and environment basically tie. And so don't put all your eggs in the economy basket. Yeah, there are issues with the economy in terms of it not being quite as good as what it was under Obama by the numbers, but that's not what people feel. And you don't vote on facts, you vote on how you feel. So it feels like it's a good economy. But caution there. New interesting data suggests that carbon emissions in China have dropped over the last month by a quarter because of the coronavirus. Just an example of how things can change relatively quickly.
Yes. So good for the environment, bad for the people living in the environment.
And again, when we say these things, it's not because we're rooting for coronavirus.
No.
We don't. But, strange things happen and strange things can happen quickly. So the great economy can not be so great in a couple of months.
Yes, that's true. And I don't know if I'm ready to answer the question of whether I would vote for coronavirus if it was the Democratic nominee. But I guess we have to consider that at some point. I'm not rooting for it. I'm just saying
we'll
whatever
see.
it
When we
takes
get back
to
from the
Trump.
break, we're going to talk about Susan Collins.
Oh, okay. And I'm not rooting for her to come in contact with coronavirus either. So don't try to pin that on me. It won't work. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Briefly distracted during the break by I don't know if we would call it viral yet or not, but a video of somebody maybe on a skydiving trip that accidentally drops their GoPro camera, I think accidentally, out of the plane. So if you're ever wondering what it looked like to fall out of a plane without a parachute and then hit the ground and live, that's the better kind of things of wondering. I think. I don't know. Maybe at that point you're in trouble. But anyway, the camera has no feelings. It survives, and it's quite fascinating. And now I'm going to be thinking about that for the rest of the day. And
well, let me give you this onion one so you could also think about things for the rest of the day. This is a meta commentary on how the media covers Democrats in general.
All right.
It says MSNBC poll finds support for Bernie Sanders has plummeted 2 points up.
That's a good one. They're on it.
Pretty much. And more media coverage here. This is from BuzzFeed News. Molly Hensley Clancy. New, I talked to the pollster behind the poll that left Elizabeth Warren out of a key question, angering her supporters. He said they were only able to poll 5 candidates, and the 5th spot went to Klobuchar.
Yes, I saw that, and I saw Jeremy Litow commenting on that one, too. Interesting discussion.
Yep.
But yeah, that's
Jeremy Litow is a journalism professor who often has excellent insight.
Yeah, so he and his class were pondering that. I was just sort of wondering whether it was maybe the clients only paid for 5 and said poll 5, the top 5 or whatever 5 you think is worth polling or what have you. Somebody had to answer for that.
So the NBC Wall Street Journal hypothetical general election matchups, we talked about the ABC Washington Post ones. This is NBC Wall Street Journal from yesterday. Biden 52, Trump 44.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's actually a pretty big lead, given the lateness of the November election, relatively speaking. Bloomberg 50, Trump 43, Sanders 50, Trump 46, Buttigieg 48, Trump 44, Klobuchar 48, Trump 45. So basically, Trump gets 44-45. He gets as much as 46 against Bernie. Yes. But his numbers are pretty much where they are. The hypothetical matchups for just the states of Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin combined, that is to say the swing states, Biden 52, Trump 44, Sanders 49, Trump 48. Close race there. Bloomey 48, Trump 46, Klobuchar 48, Trump 47, and Pete ties at 47. So in the swing states, by the way, they're called swing states because they tend to be close. It's close. And overall, Democrats still have a lead. Trump's numbers do go up a little bit with latest polling. He's gained a full point from 43 to 44 in the aggregate, something like that.
All right.
But not so much in the panel polls. And G. Elliott Morris posted yesterday, you can count me as firmly in the camp that thinks all this talk about Trump's approval rating hitting record highs and his chance of re-election soaring recently is pretty much BS. Of course, he oversees the YouGov economist polling. He works for The Economist. And they don't show it.
Oh.
Interesting.
All right.
Pew had a piece. There's differences between panel polls, which show no change, and telephone polls, which show a small change, a small Trump rise. And the panel polls were very accurate so far in primary season. But it also depends upon how you recruit the panel. If you say anybody can join, you can get as much as 6 or 7% noise. If you recruit people by taking random digit dialing phone databases and then call them and see if you want to join, you get much more accurate data.
Okay.
And to the point where you're only getting about 1% noise, which is not enough to really change anything. And that is a fascinating result. So all panels are not built the same, and all pollsters are not built the same, and some of them are garbage.
Yeah.
So this is a study from Pew called Bogus Respondents in Online Polls. Just thought that was very, very interesting.
Yeah. Well, that goes. That whole segment goes in part to. I had a question from Gideon the other day that I thought I would refer to you, but.
Hi, Gideon. What was that?
Well, he was showing me a relatively, I guess, recent Quinnipiac poll. In our news cycle world, ancient, February 10th. But asking the question, basically the real question was why Trump remains so strong. And I guess he was really looking for, from across the pond, the question is, how could 44% of your electorate still be interested in voting for Trump? And I didn't really have.
How did you do Brexit?
Answer, but, right, yeah.
Why did Boris Johnson win?
That I know. I'm not certain exactly what he's getting at. But my initial response was, there's no reason why. There's no faulty polling or anything on. There really are just a lot of people who. No,
if you offer it as a choice,
yes,
rather than a referendum.
Yeah.
Like if you vote, do I like Boris Johnson? Yes or no, you get bad numbers. But if you vote as a choice between
that's true.
Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, well, I don't like Corbyn even more than I don't like Johnson, so I'm voting for Johnson. A lot of people did, and he won.
Yeah, and it does come in the context.
If you ask whether people like or dislike Trump, no. But what if you have to vote for Bernie Sanders versus?
Yes, in this case, it was
is this Corbyn versus Charles Foster Kane? And what if you have to vote for Sanders versus Bloomberg? Bernie wins. What if you have to vote for Sanders versus Bloomberg in a general election, not in a Democratic primary? We don't know.
Yeah, and this does come in the context of his pulling out the Warren head-to-head numbers. Hey, Warren is only up 48-44, what I didn't answer is that's a walloping in a presidential election.
Yeah, if it stayed that way, that would actually be a pretty decent win. The problem for Elizabeth Warren is her chances of actually winning, given the delegates she's won and the roadmap ahead. This is Matt Grossman, political scientist with no dog in this fight, posting on the model that 538 built about chances of winning. Currently, and this one, and this is from yesterday, so things can change, but Bernie had a 2 in 5 or 38% chance of winning the nomination. higher than anybody else, but still, not 50% or more. No one, meaning a contested convention, was at 37% chance of winning. Those are the odds. Biden was at 12. Bloomey was at 8. Pete was at 3. And Elizabeth Warren was at 1%, 1 in 100.
Yeah.
If your odds are not that good, well, Grossman says, I understand frustrations of those who prefer candidates with little chance of winning. I do too. I also understand and share the annoyance that Iowa and New Hampshire roll, but historically it's not early but late in the process. Few, or maybe only one, have a precedented path to a majority. In other words, you can look back at various and sundry previous primaries and say, well, given where we are right now, Bernie's the one with a path. And then you could see your way to seeing how there could be a contested convention, but you can't really see a path for any of the others to actually win outright.
All right.
So, Mike Bloomberg would like to make it Bloomberg versus Sanders tonight.
Sure.
I think that everybody will be beating up on Mike Bloomberg for various and sundry reasons we went over Monday. But really, Bernie is running against the contested convention. That's his biggest rival right now.
Okay.
So that's why I keep saying to Bernie people, cool it and don't be so, triumphalist in terms of winning.
It's a bit early for that.
Maybe Bernie really needs better people around him. I'm not talking about, well, you can't prove that this obnoxious Bernie person is anything but a troll. That's true. A lot of them are trolls. But you have press secretary and campaign manager and other people who are pretty darn obnoxious. And, if you're going to say, well, we got here where we were with him, so we can't get rid of him. Well, fine. You're going to remain fighting against the contested convention then.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
if you want to grow your support,
being obnoxious.
Then,
True.
Do it in a way that actually grows your support.
That's been a long time thing for him,
It is. And, I think he's a stubborn old man. He's not going to change, but I'm just saying.
Maybe. Or else it's our fault for thinking they're obnoxious. But they're really courageous truth tellers. That's another version of it.
When you get 30% of a Democratic electorate who actually like you.
Yes.
I mean, the Democratic electorate likes Bernie. Maybe it's because of Larry David. I don't know. I think that would be his best choice for vice president, by the way. I think it would be a fantastic show. But if 70% want to vote for somebody else, you really ought to work a little harder about getting a bigger pool of people behind you.
Yes,
even if you win, because a factional candidate in a split race can win, see Donald Trump in 2016.
Yes. And those numbers will change if you start winning.
Is your goal to win the Democratic primary or is your goal to win the general election? Those are separate things.
True, though they should go hand in hand. And, the numbers will change. Fewer people will express such a strong dislike as the juggernaut begins to roll, if it rolls.
If it rolls. If you have a contested convention, it's a different story altogether, or as we like to call it, a train wreck. So that's what you're running against. What you're trying to do is avoid that happening.
Yes.
The best way to do that is to recruit other people, and the best way to do that is not do it the way they've done so far.
Yes, or super delegates. That would be an awesome way of doing it.
That would be, can you imagine? Mike Bloomberg doesn't win, but he gets enough delegates to be kingmaker. Isn't that exactly what we want?
What do you mean?
Super Tuesday comes in and he wins enough delegates to say, I've got the deciding block.
Okay. Is that exactly who wants?
It's exactly what no one wants.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes. All right. The opposite. All right. Sarcastic. Got it. I was like, oh my God, wait a minute.
I'm never sarcastic.
What have I signed up for? Did I say
that? So anyway, I promised to talk about Susan Collins, and I want to because there's a new Colby College poll out. Sarah Gideon, who's running against her probably. I don't know that she's had her official primary, you're the candidate. But Sarah Gideon, 43, Susan Collins, 42.
All right.
And I thought that was awfully interesting. And there are some interesting results from that when you break down. And there's also a really fascinating Rebecca Traister story that I have in the roundup. about Susan Collins. But let's just look at the polling here via Colby College. Sarah Gideon gets a plus 31 with women under 50, a plus 22 of 18 to 34-year-olds, a plus 9 in CD1, Bill and Portland, Maine, Southern Congressional District in Maine, there's 2, and plus 4 among independents. Collins gets plus 20 men from rural area, and Maine is very, very rural. Yes. Plus 15 with men over 50, and plus 8 in CD2, the Northern District. So, and there's an 18-point gender gap on whether Collins made the right decision to acquit Trump. According to the Colby poll, 79% of respondents paid attention to the impeachment proceedings. The sample was split on the Senate's decision to acquit the president. 48 said it was right move, 49% said it was the wrong move. And while 46% of respondents said Collins' vote would probably not change her opinion, 36% indicated her vote would lead them to vote against her, and 17% for. So she didn't win new friends and influence people with that particular vote.
Okay.
So I thought that was interesting. And Rebecca Traister has a long piece about the entire history of Susan Collins and how she ran, and really makes the point that she was a moderate when she had Olympia Snowe to rely on for advice.
Yes. And
lately, not so much. And one of the interesting thing is just how rural it is. You know, there's over 400 towns in Maine, and Susan Collins has been to them all. Not been to the mall. She's been to them all.
Oh, I see. Yes, well, people cluster together when it's cold.
Yeah. And despite all of this, Collins has gone from pleasing an unusually high number of people, at least some of the time, to pleasing vanishingly few people, almost never. Despite this, she still might win. The money's pouring in for Gideon, and at least in southern Maine, home to liberal and left voters, bumpers are affixed with Bye-Bye Susan stickers. Okay. Every time she makes a statement, the internet is awash with people posting donations to Gideon. Google Analytics show that impeachment season had a huge spike in searches for Collins' opponent. But it's hard to beat incumbents. Pundits always want to predict that Maine is much more competitive than it is, says one of the political scientists there who studies it. Toby McGrath said, it's probably the most difficult race she's ever had, but one of the difficulties for Democrats is there's going to be a highest turnout we've ever had in Maine. With the presidential election, we could be 75 or 80% voting. A lot of low-information voters showing up in the polls, and they've known Susan Collins' name for 5 elections, and who is this other person?
Yes, true.
That's why incumbents are tough to beat.
Right.
So, choosing between a party that now demands total fealty and a constituency she's promised independence, Collins, a woman who's built her image around a careful, thoughtful decision-maker, appears to have made no decision at all about how the best way is to keep her power. Instead, she's hoping she can pretend to do both without anybody noticing, and it might work. But if I were her, I'd be deeply concerned.
Yeah. True. And there are only 400 towns to get to talk to people and talk them into changing their minds.
Right. And I want to remind you, that group of federal judges calling an emergency meeting, that meeting's today. You haven't heard anything because it takes place today.
I thought it was yesterday.
No.
But okay. Good.
It was originally reported Tuesday, but I believe the meeting is actually today. Anyway, I expect to hear more.
All right. I expect it. Judges, call me. I don't know.
Call me.
Text me. Tweet the answer. We'll have to see what they come up with. I really don't know what they're going to be able to.
You know what the power of advertising is?
No.
You say call me, and I think of these Oppo Harold Ford ads.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's true. It reminds you of lots of the use of the line. Yeah, true. Sticks with you.
It does. So sometimes advertising actually works. We'll see what happens with Mike Bloomberg and the crap ton of money that he's throwing in there. So, that's basically kind of a smorgasbord of where we're at today, the stories we're covering, the things we're looking at. It's going to be an interesting debate. I expect Bernie to do quite well on Saturday. Among other reasons, he polls very well in Nevada, depending upon which poll you look at, and polls aren't that good for trying to pick caucus states. On the other hand, he does very well with Hispanic Latino voters. And so that counts. On the third hand, culinary leadership doesn't like his healthcare proposals.
Yeah.
And on the fourth hand, membership doesn't always do what leadership says.
Right, true.
So
Absolutely
nobody knows nothing. We'll see what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll see how it goes, and interesting pictures filing in from the early voting in Nevada.
Which has been pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So, what does it all mean?
I don't know.
Nobody knows. I will say this. It's going to be very hard, although people will do it because primary season is pie fight season. It's going to be very hard to accuse us, you and me, you and I.
Oh, I'll do it.
I and you, of taking sides because we don't really have sides.
I guess I feel that our audience is capable of accusing us.
Yeah. Oh, I think they
They're
will.
very
But at the same time,
capable people, and I think they can figure it out. Yeah,
at
but
the
I
same
hope that
time,
they
you have
don't.
to vote before I do.
Yeah. Well,
So you have
Bill
to make
will.
up your mind
I
sooner
will.
than I do.
Yes.
I mean, it's less than 2 weeks, David.
Right.
You got to be thinking about this.
What are you saying? Why are you saying?
You got to make a decision.
I mean,
Get
yes.
off the fence.
Yeah, I think I'll be okay. I don't know. We'll wait and see. I'm just hanging out and waiting to see if anybody implodes between now and 2 weeks from now, so that it narrows the field at all. I don't know whether that's going to happen or whether it's going to matter, because I guess the names on the ballot are a lock at this point. Looks like Bill has to vote on March 3rd too, by the way.
Yeah.
So
By the way, so March 3rd, that's when we'll find out if Sarah Gideon's going to be Susan Collins's.
I guess so. I mean, they don't always do the.
Yeah, sometimes they,
presidential
like in
and-
Connecticut, we have a convention.
Yeah, they don't always.
It's like
do them
it's
at
like
the same
a straw
time,
poll kind of thing, but they make their decision at the convention. But
All right.
if Sarah Gideon wins the primary, whether it's binding or not, and I haven't looked it up, she'll be the nominee. So that's how that works.
Then
But
we'll
then I'll have to make up my mind. And the thing is, your rationale behind not deciding until you see what's going down. Think of all the early voters in California who have already voted who don't get a chance to do that.
Well,
So whereas there is a rationale behind getting your vote in and banking it and getting it done,
yes.
and in California the people voting are, older,
Yeah.
as is often the case
maybe.
with these early mail-in ballots.
Right.
There is a rationale for waiting so you can see what the lay of the land is. You don't want to waste your vote. If you cast your vote for somebody like Amy Klobuchar, and by the time
Right.
things crystallize in California actually votes on Super Tuesday, she becomes non-viable, then anybody who doesn't get 15% of the vote isn't going to be doing very well at the Democratic convention. So in effect, you've wasted your vote when in fact you should have been choosing between the 2 viable people or the 3 viable people. So that's the rationale behind waiting.
Yes. I mean, my guess ordinarily would be that early voting is done by people who are fairly confident that their candidate is going to be in it, at least.
Well,
until
but they're
they
also
get-
confident of what they want.
Yes,
There
that's
are
true.
people who say, I get all of that, or I don't get all of that, but I don't really care about all of that. Here's who I want. I'm voting for them. Why are you making it complicated by telling me to do strategic voting? I want to vote for who I want to vote
can do
for
that.
and button it.
Yes. My guess is the people who worry about things like strategic voting are saying, well, then I'll wait. And the people who are saying, I know who I want, and they're one of the front runners, say, I'm just going to bank my vote now and walk away. And if they have any doubts about it, there are no John Delaney, disappointed John Delaney early votes out there. There's probably one because there's a lot
He's
of
got a
people,
cousin. But I'm just saying, people are complicated, and so
Yes.
it's not always easy to predict why people do what they do, let alone what they do.
Okay. Oh, you know what? We have to do this.
You do? What?
I don't know. It says so. Well, it does. It asks us to please do it. So that's in effect demanding that.
Oh, they said please. So,
Right. Please at least mention, and this is good. This is what we were looking for here. Please at least mention. I hope I'm getting the names right. Bray Kitteman and Betsy Sweet, who are Gideon's primary opponents. Gideon's is Colin. Well, Stephanie Helms tweets us that Gideon is Collins with the blue wardrobe. So I mean, what do I know? Maybe that's true. But anyway, yeah, I've always felt bad about that every time we mention, well, she's not the nominee, but we know nothing about the race. And thankfully, Stephanie does and tells us Bree Kitteman, BreKidaman, and Betsy Sweet, spelled just like it sounds,
Are they on
out
Twitter?
there too. Are they on Twitter? Well, I don't have a Twitter handle for them.
I mean, where are
But
you getting
maybe-
this please mention?
So Stephanie Helms is on Twitter as Sidra, SIDHRA,
Okay.
tweets this to us.
So if
sure the
listening,
two of the
maybe can
candidates
answer the question,
Okay.
will it be decided on March 3rd?
Okay, that's a good question, too. And maybe one of them can
I'll
answer
try to look it up and get back to you on that after I get off.
Okay.
But if they happen to know, I can just, shoot you something real fast. That'd be great.
Okay. Well, we'll ask them that by saying, there you go. There's the question. So, Stephanie, if you're listening, or
Because
Bill, or anybody
the
else
way
in
I was raised
Maine,
is you answer a question with a question.
Right. I don't know. Was I raised? You were raised that way. Were you raised that way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Weren't you?
Okay. Was I? No. Apparently, it's not working. So I've had no practice with it.
All right. Anyway, so I'll get
tell
off and I'll
everyone
go
what
look
the
that up
answer
in
is.
case nobody tells you.
Yes.
And let's see what the 2020 U.S. Senate election in Maine,
You're clearly just gonna
Democratic
stay here
primary
and do it.
candidates declared. Bree Kidman, Ross LaJeunesse, former head of international relations at Google, Betsy Sweet, activist, former director of the Maine Women's Lobby, and candidate for governor of Maine in 2018.
Okay.
Sarah Gideon, and Michael Bunker, travel agent.
I was like,
And there you have it. Those are
Michael
the
Bunker,
declared
travel
candidates
agent.
according to Wikipedia.
Show me your travel papers, ma'am. That's a travel agent for you. Okay. Yeah. Well, all right. So there are even more, but only these two are of interest to Stephanie, and that's fair. Why not? So,
right.
Okay.
And then, in the interest of fairness, two candidates have declared their intentions to run for the Maine Green Independent Party.
Oh?
Lisa Savage, school teacher, and David Gibson, solar design specialist.
Okay.
Who
we're not
withdrew and endorsed Savage. So there will be
Savage.
a Green Independent primary, and that's fine. Vote for whoever you want in the primary. But then when it comes to the general election, don't vote third party. Thank you very much. That's my message for today.
All right. Well, I have no choice but to accept that, and I'll do it. Okay. Here's some answers. There's some Twitter handles for everybody from Stephanie. Yes, the primary decides. Also, Tiffany Bond is running as an independent. And remember, ranked choice voting.
Yes, it got us a congressman.
Right. So, important information for, I'm going to say about 399 out of the 400 towns in Maine. That last town either doesn't care or already knows. I'm not certain what the story is with it, but we'll get to the bottom of that after our break, too.
Right.
I don't know. I'm promising things I have no idea. But thank you, Stephanie, and for your prompt response as well. And remember, she doesn't even get our question until 15 seconds after we ask it. So,
Okay.
It's like flying to the moon.
Take care, David, and take care, listeners out there. I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll have some choice words about last night's debate. It's actually tonight's debate. Maybe we'll have more information on the judges' meeting. And the whole thing with Bill Barr in the New York Times reporting he's considering quitting, which is, of course, BS that he's planted. And the whole thing about these pardons, which just make the Justice Department crisis even worse since Trump didn't go through any of it. And basically trying to pardon his friends to get everybody to understand that everybody does it. Everybody cheats. Everybody gets Russian help. Everybody does it. And it's all bad. And so that, I think, really needs to be a major focus of the November election. It's got to be a referendum on Trump. And if you make it a choice election between him and somebody else, he'll do better than if you just make it a referendum on him. That's my words to people still considering who to vote for. That doesn't help you decide who to vote for. But be aware that given the state of the Democratic primary right now, whoever wins, we're going to have a lot of work to do.
Yes, well, it's all right. Work is
no automatic wins here. It's no, we picked that guy, now we win. That's not how it's going to work.
It should be. I think that's fine. We ought to just do it that way.
I think that's fine, like sitting in that cafe with a cup of coffee while everything's burning around you saying it's fine.
Yeah. Is it a cafe? I never even really took a look around it. I thought it was a home.
Could be my living room. I don't know. But, there it is. Take care, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Very good. We'll wait for those results and see what we get for tomorrow. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. Or do I appreciate it? And you ask me the same question back, and I'll see you tomorrow. Will I? We don't know. Okay. By the way, the Twitter handles for the folks mentioned by Stephanie, I'll just share them with everybody here too. First, one of them is easy. Betsy Sweet ME for Maine, all one word. There are no underscores or anything. And for Bree Kidman, it's BK, but it's spelled out. BEEKAY 4ME. For me. BK4ME. BK for me, you could say it that way. That would like help it rhyme. Maybe it's easier to remember it that way. BEEKAY. BK for me. Not Burger King, but Bree Kitteman. Bray? What's the full name? I don't know. We could look it up. I could click on it. There she is. Okay. It doesn't tell me what her full name is, but we'll just go with the one she gives us. All right. So that's pretty cool. We shouldn't forget that they're out there. So an excellent reminder and something we were really lacking in. So I'm glad that Stephanie stepped in and reminded us or filled it in filled in the blank, because we get the other name all the time. And, all right, I'm not going to tell you guys how to vote. You know what you're doing. Clearly, Stephanie knows what she's doing. If you're sitting there in Maine and not sure what to do and you're just thinking, I'll just go with the person I've heard the most about because I haven't heard anything about the rest of them. Well, now you can go and check them out. And you can even find them on Twitter and follow along. And by the way, feel free. I mean, there still are 2 weeks left. Please do chime in on the KITM hashtag and tell us what you found out. I mean, I'll read it. What the hell do I know? I'll read anything. So send me those notes, and I'll share it with other listeners, and it may make a difference. There's only 400 towns out there. At least one or two of them have got to be listening to the show. We see at least one. I guess Stephanie and Bill could be from the same town, but the odds are against it. What with there being 400 and all, and if we broadcast the facts about who else is running, and maybe a tidbit or two about whether they're good people, then maybe it'll make a bit of a difference. So we only have until March 3rd to do it, so hurry up. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's catch up with some of the other crazy things happening today. I do see a story now circulating of some interest. Let's see. Jim Scuto on this one with Barbara Starr, both writing for CNN. Top Pentagon policy official expected to depart administration. Why do you care? Well, it's in the story. How about we read that? The Pentagon's top policy official is expected to depart his post soon, according to two sources familiar with the matter. John Rood. Good name for the Trump administration, really, but it's spelled R-O-O-D. He is Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the Pentagon, and he has lost support among senior national security leadership, which means, I guess, that he has some redeeming quality somewhere. And he has been asked for his resignation, one of the sources said. Rood is the Pentagon's top policy official and oversees aspects of the Pentagon's relationship with U.S. allies and partners. Rood was involved in certifying to Congress. Are you ready to find out why he's being booted from the Pentagon? He was involved in certifying to Congress that, fill in the blank. Yes, that Ukraine had embarked on significant reforms to justify its receipt of the $250 million in security assistance. Remember the part of the story wherein Trump says, I don't want to send the money to Ukraine because they're corrupt. I think they're corrupt. Someone should look into that. And so they pulled at the levers of government on Trump's behalf and said, we want to put a hold on this thing because the president fears that the money will be lost to corruption. So what do you guys have to say about that? And remember, the Pentagon came back in a day and said, they're fine. We're good on corruption. We certify it. The law allows for the president to step in and ask these questions, but the official answer, although maybe the answer's wrong, it's official, just like the caucuses in Iowa. But the Pentagon comes back and says, we certify that the government of Ukraine has, as they say here, embarked on significant reforms, enough anyway, to justify its receipt of this $250 million in security clearance. And I'm sure that that's a process that we go through every once in a while for other countries, and we rubber stamp it and say, yeah, it's good. You know, the Congress in formulating policy says, well, that money shouldn't go to them if they're corrupt. But if the Pentagon, or whoever's giving out the money, will certify to Congress that they've done a pretty good job in cleaning up the corruption or have made significant strides towards cleaning up the corruption, and will come on record and say so, something we can point at, so that if the money later is stolen through corruption, we can say, well, you told us that they were good on corruption now, or better anyway. It's a, kind of a CYA thing, but they went through the exercise and they did it. Well, that certification, of course, undermined one of the justifications, concerns about corruption in Kyiv, that some members of the Trump administration made to defend blocking aid to Ukraine. So they're getting rid of the guy who said the opposite of what they wanted to say about Ukraine. That's basically it. I guess there's some more detail about it. Let's weed through it. Hours after Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, which kicked off impeachment proceedings, not really entirely accurate, but in the popular recounting of it, I guess, Rude emailed Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, who had been on the job 2 days at that point, informing him about an upcoming deputies meeting to discuss the president's concern about endemic corruption in Ukraine and his reported view that the U.S. should cease providing security assistance, according to emails reviewed by CNN. Rude notes in his email to the secretary that placing a hold on security assistance at this time would jeopardize this unique window of opportunity and undermine our defense priorities with a key partner in the strategic competition with Russia. The Pentagon declined to comment on the expected departure. I wonder if the key sin here is noting the position that the U.S. is in vis-a-vis Russia. In other words, I'm sure that they were pissed off just because it was counter to what the narrative they wanted on Ukraine, but it has the added bonus value of pointing out that doing this on Ukraine is a huge favor to Russia, and we were just working on making everybody try to forget the whole Russia thing and dismiss it as a hoax, and this brings it back up. Anyway, as head of policy at the Pentagon, Rude helped oversee implementing the Trump administration's national defense strategy, which placed a greater emphasis on countering China and Russia, as well as overseeing the nuclear posture review, which called for changes to the U.S. nuclear arsenal, including the addition of new low-yield nuclear weapons. Rude joined the administration in January of 2018, serving under then Defense Secretary James Mattis. He has had numerous policy jobs at the Pentagon in previous administrations and also previously worked for the CIA as an analyst. He has also held senior roles with major defense contractors Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. So there you have it. So, an important little bit of information to add to the picture. Another person forced out for providing a version of events in the world that run counter to the gaslighting narrative that Donald Trump wanted you to take away from things. All right, so that of some interest as well. Let's see. What other things did we want to deal with? Well, of course, there's all the pardons, but I think we've kind of put most of what needs to be out there on that, except we haven't listed necessarily all the people who got pardons yet. Let's see. There was some interesting writing on the subject, of course, that I would like to share with you that appeared on the front pages of Daily Kos in the last day or so. So, Mark Sumner writing, Donald Trump gives giant middle finger to justice and pardons the biggest names in corruption and fraud. So, there's that view of it, and I think, quite honestly, encapsulates most of our views of it, though I appreciated the style with which he did it. Let's see. By the way, Trump knows an awful lot of corrupt or troubled professional sports teams owners. Isn't that interesting? I guess the first out of the box of yesterday's pardons was for Ed DeBartolo Jr., as I understand it, who formerly was the owner of the San Francisco 49ers, tried to get into the casino business in 1991, Mark notes in his piece, before getting tangled up with crooked Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards. Edwards asked for a bribe for a gambling license down in Louisiana, DiBartolo lied to federal regulators about the details. And in 1998, he was convicted for taking part in an extortion scheme and gave up control of the 49ers. But that didn't stop him from being planted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, of course. And it didn't stop Trump from pardoning him. I'm just sort of pointing that out, I guess, thinking also back to Robert Kraft and his getting caught up in the massage parlor thing happening in and around Mar-a-Lago, and the owner of those massage parlors hanging out in Mar-a-Lago, and that's weird. And I don't know. There's the other one from the Jets that he hasn't done anything dirty that I'm aware of, but he's probably done something dirty, because how do you get that much money without doing something dirty? And he ends up, like ambassador to the UK or something? I don't know. Just a weird collection of people. Well, Trump attracts weird people. Bernie Carrick among those pardoned as well, and that's a pretty disgusting thing to have to contemplate, and I imagine that was as a sop to Giuliani. By the way, crazy thing. I mean, Carrick was on my radar recently as a mention, an aside, in one of the weirder stories that I have seen circulating lately. And I don't know, do I have this one in pocket? Because it wasn't purely a political story, so I may not have put it aside, but maybe you saw it in the last couple of days. Gosh, do I have anything on it? One of the most bizarre long reads that I had seen in a long time, and I guess I don't have it readily at hand in pocket. I'm sure I just said, well, it's a fascinating story, and I stopped and I read it, but I thought, there's no way I'm going to read this thing on the air. But it was just one of the craziest things you ever saw about somebody who has got a connection to Carrick. Carrick, of course, denies that they're connected in any serious way. But yeah, where can I find this guy? I have to Google this. But this was a guy who was accused of essentially, I don't know how. I don't even know how to describe it. He moves into. Here it is. The guy in question is Lawrence Ray? Is that the guy's name? And here's the Bernie Carrick denial from a couple days later. Bernie Carrick saying, Sarah Lawrence defender is the definition of psychopath. Bernard Carrick might have thought Lawrence Ray, that's the guy's name, was best man material decades ago, and that's the connection. They were friends at some point, and Lawrence Ray served as the best man at Bernie Carrick's wedding at some point. Ugh. But I guess the best encapsulation, perhaps, is just to continue reading this here. Ray was indicted this week on federal charges that he ran an extortion, money laundering, and prostitution enterprise that had its roots at Sarah Lawrence College in Yonkers, New York, in case you had no idea, and victimized a half dozen students and former students over the course of a decade. I mean, it was a bizarro story, and a long read of the thing written up in, New Yorker or something, or I don't remember who did the profile. The guy, moves into his daughter's dorm room at Sarah Lawrence College and becomes this weird guru Svengali type figure to the kids living there, and involves them in all kinds of, you wouldn't even believe it. I guess I recommend to you, it's New York Magazine, The Stolen Kids of Sarah Lawrence. What happened to the group of bright college students who fell under the sway of a classmate's father, by Ezra Marcus and James D. Walsh. I mean, an amazing story, and there's just no way of encapsulating it, except to say that this guy took control of their lives somehow. They were all, I guess, in one way or another, vulnerable kids, and he exerted influence over them, and in rather despicable ways. And you can use your imagination about what that might mean, and you'd probably be right. But wow, well, so some connection there. I was going to say casual connection to Bernie Carrick, only in fairness to Carrick. But who needs to be fair to Carrick? He just got a pardon. So let's pile it on. The two of them were friends, and they're both clearly have spent some time involved with some very unsavory ways, with some very unsavory people as well. And no surprise that the two of them are friends, and that he was, I mean, more than friends. How do you get to be best man at someone's wedding? People make mistakes or whatever. But anyway, Bernie Kerik is out there disclaiming any current relationship with the guy. But he's in the clear now. So what does he care, I guess? All right. It's pretty strange. That's all I can say. That wasn't where I wanted the news to go, of course. So let's head back over to Pocket and find some other discussion of the topics. There was more about the pardons actually, there was more from Mark, but there was also a piece here from Laura Clausen. I'll share the headline on her piece here. Trump's pardons, again, make a mockery of Republican claims that he ever cared about corruption. A great point that helps connect things back to his impeachment. And a good point. Remember how Republicans spent months insisting that Donald Trump withheld military aid to Ukraine, not because he wanted to cheat in the 2020 elections, but because he really, really cared about corruption? Even though he never mentioned corruption on his first phone call with Vladimir Zelensky. And then even though the Pentagon certified that Ukraine was fighting corruption and should get the money. Yes. All those claims that Republicans made against all the evidence that Trump cared about corruption. And what does he do? Well, first, during his own impeachment trial, Trump stood side by side with a world leader charged with corruption to unveil a major foreign policy plan. And, of course, now he's handing out pardons and sentence commutations to corrupt politicians, former corrupt law enforcement official, the dirty cop. Remember how he was so mad about dirty cops framing him? Well, he's pardoning dirty cops now, Bernie Kerik. A corrupt lobbyist, yes, another of the names, was it David Safavian, is that right? Wrapped up in the, why can't I bring his name to mind now? Jack, what's his last name? You know who I'm talking about. The famously corrupt Republican lobbyist. Dang it. All right. Well, you know who I'm talking about, so that's good news. You're smart people. And, of course, a couple other corrupt rich guys. So let's take a stroll down memory lane. Maybe this will help with my memory here. All the way back to a month or two ago to hear from Republicans about how much Trump cares about corruption. And, shall we take that stroll? There's Ron Johnson swearing that that's the case. Devin Nunes swearing that that's the case. And you know you can't trust those guys. Anyway, good point there, and well argued, I think. Let's see. Where can I find more information about the various people who actually got their pardons? Abramoff, by the way, thank you, finally popping back into my head. Jack Abramoff is the guy who Safavian was tied to. Let's see, there was, as I mentioned, Mark had two pieces on this one. I'll just read off the headline and see if there's anything to cull from that piece. Trump's attacks on judges and prosecutors aren't the worst part of his threat to the judicial system. Another piece that ran yesterday that may or may not have had anything to do with the pardons. No, in fact, it was a Roger Stone piece here. This week alone, Mark writes, Donald Trump has attacked career prosecutors because they refused to go along with a political decision to interfere in the sentencing of one of Trump's advisors, and someone who lied on his behalf, of course. Trump has also taken multiple swings at the federal judge involved in the case, including demanding a do-over for his pal Roger Stone after Stone was convicted on 7 out of 7 counts. But as bad as those attacks on the justice system may be, there's one other thrust from Trump that may be the most deadly to anything resembling impartial justice. Trump has been attacking jurors. Yes, I did mean to bring this one up on Monday, I think. Leveraging a statement from the jury foreman in the Stone case, I guess, that they thought the U.S. attorneys involved in the case were honorable. And I mean, I think you say that just about anybody. Trump has made multiple assertions that the jury was biased against Stone from the start. Not only that, but he has tweeted attacks against the jury foreman by name, destroying the concept that a private citizen serving on a jury out of civic duty deserves to be shielded from political pressure and threats. So to hell with that, obviously. Trump's attack on the jurors isn't just a head-on assault on the American system of jurisprudence. It's also a slam at the attorneys, not the U.S. attorneys, Stone's attorneys. After all, and anybody who's watched a trial would be able to tell you this one, every one of the jurors that served on this jury survived questioning and challenges from Stone's legal team in order to be seated. The transcript of the jury selection even shows Stone's team learning that a juror had previously been a Democratic candidate for office and declaring themselves fine with it. Trump is creating a standard by which there's no trial in America that could hold up, or at least no trial that Trump wants to see hold up. And it's not just Trump. Naturally, Fox News is all in on the idea of attacking the privacy and assumed independence of jurors. Judge Andrew Napolitano has been all over this topic, insisting that the juror had an obligation to reveal information that very much was revealed during the jury selection process. In fact, Stone's attorneys were absolutely aware that some of the jurors had political positions opposed to Trump, with the transcript showing an attorney questioning one potential juror's previous response, repeating, "Your answer was supported Hillary Clinton in 2016, deeply opposed to everything Donald Trump stands for." And the juror responds, "Yes." They were perfectly open and honest about it, and they knew it, and they were questioned about it, and they still ended up on the jury. Stone's attorney accepted that juror, along with others who said they had political positions opposed to Trump. There is no basis here for any retrial unless Stone wants to file an appeal on the grounds that his counsel was inadequate, which is a tough play considering the essentially unlimited funds he had available to surround himself with a multi-member team. In many ways, Trump's attack on jurors resembles another campaign that he and his Republican allies just waged, the one against the intelligence community whistleblower, whose information spurred the investigation that led to Trump's impeachment. In that case, the whistleblower's role was simply to bring information to the attention of authorities, no different than someone who called in on a tip line or sent police anonymous information about a potential crime. The identity and motivations of the whistleblower mattered not one whit as soon as that role was performed. Not one piece of evidence came from the whistleblower. Not one action was taken based on testimony by the whistleblower. But the IG whistleblower and Stone trial juror both represent something that Trump and Fox cannot stand. Ordinary people trying to do the right thing, even in the face of pressure from the powerful. When that happens, Republicans spring into action to attack, to threaten, and demean. Because until people learn that they should just shut up around their betters, the world just can't be the way that Trump and his allies demanded. Okay. Interesting point, interesting piece as well. And now I feel bad having read extensively from two pieces from Mark and not read all the way through what Laura had to say. Although I did kind of feel like, well, all right, well, we were being reminded of the various times that both Devin Nunes and Ron Johnson had said that Trump was really and truly concerned about corruption. Do I go back now? I mean, I guess we might as well put those quotes on the record, not just because we didn't read Laura's piece and read Mark's instead, but because those are, I felt like maybe it wasn't important news to remind people. Maybe reading the quotes would be helpful in embarrassing these people if they're capable of embarrassment. The first one actually was from Jim Jordan, who has his own problems. But his quote was, "Corruption is not just prevalent in Ukraine, it's the system. Our president said, time out, let's check out this new guy," during the impeachment inquiry. Then there was the quote from Devin Nunes, "President Trump has good reason to be wary of Ukrainian election meddling against his campaign," which he doesn't really, "and of widespread corruption in that country. When it comes to sending U.S. taxpayer money overseas, the president is focused on burden sharing and corruption," according to Trump's impeachment defense counsel during the proceedings. Had Trump expressed serious concern about corruption anywhere before he turned his eyes to Ukraine? Well, Senator Ron Johnson said, if the subject was Ukraine, he's expressed his concern about corruption in Ukraine, which everybody understood was endemic, including Ukrainian President Zelensky, who won. So I haven't talked to the president about other countries where that might have come up. Why is that an answer to anything? Again and again, Laura reminds us they told us that Trump cared so much about corruption that he held up nearly $400 million in aid that Congress had appropriated for Ukraine and that the Defense Department had signed off on because of Ukrainian anti-corruption efforts. And then Trump goes ahead and commutes the sentence of former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich for trying to sell an open Senate seat to the highest bidder. He plans to pardon former New York City Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik, and went ahead and did it. I guess this was written before it was completed, who committed perjury, tax fraud, and more. And so it goes. Donald Trump cares about corruption like he cares about anyone not named Donald, or possibly Ivanka Trump, only when it benefits him to claim he does. So there we go. I'm glad I got the rest of that story in after all. Those are some damning quotes for people who just don't, unfortunately, there's only so much you can do in using it against the actual, the people who uttered those quotes. They just don't feel the shame. All right, let me catch up with some other stories that have been submitted by listeners, and I have a few of them. I want to spread them out perhaps over a couple of days. We got time for one before we head out on our break, I think, and that's our good friend Darwin Darko, who brings us this insight on the Space Force, right out of Stars and Stripes, which was in our news roundup yesterday as being defunded by the president's budget. But apparently this is like the second or third time that he's brought us stories from Stars and Stripes. He must be a regular reader. I know he's got a military connection, and so I guess he's just kept up with his subscription of Stars and Stripes. But here they are discussing what's up with Space Force and just how are they going to populate that thing.
Hey there, David. Thanks for including this piece. I know folks have been wondering what's been going on with this, so here's an update about the Space Force. The newly established Space Force will grow from 1 member to an estimated 15,000 to 16,000 troops in the coming years. But it remains unclear what Space Force members will be called. This piece in Stars and Stripes brought to you by Corey Dickstein, titled DoD molds name for Space Force members. Space Force planners are taking the naming of the troops very seriously, said Air Force Lieutenant General David Thompson, who was assigned as the Vice Commander of the Space Force. It's something we've spent some serious time and energy on, Thompson told reporters on February 5th at the Pentagon. There are a couple of really strong options on what we might be called, and some pretty strong opinions. What we'd like to do is ensure we've thought as broadly as we can and consider what that ought to be before we land on it. Planners have sought guidance from the Language Department at the Air Force Academy, from the Defense Language Institute, and they have conducted crowdsourcing with troops expecting to transfer into the Space Force to determine what their service equivalent will be to soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen. They have made a few determinations on what Space Force members would not be called. This should be good. Thompson ruled out naming them spacemen or space cadets. I think those would be perfect, personally. Would be great, right on the nose. But he continues. He declined to identify names that officials are considering. It is just one aspect of many unknowns that remain in the development of the first new military service established since the Air Force creation in 1948. It will still be months before the Space Force has actual troops. Now, about 16,000 personnel, about 3,400 Air Force officers, 6,200 enlisted airmen, and some 8,000 civilians are assigned to the Space Force but remain a part of the Air Force. To date, only one person has been officially transferred into the Space Force, the Chief of Space Operations, General J. Raymond.
So it occurs to me, of course, that the break is coming up a little bit faster than I thought it was going to, and I'm worried now that although there's only a very little bit, minute or so left in the report, sorry, Darwin, I think our break is going to come up and it's going to end up interrupting things. I'm going to roll the rest of it, I hope, at some point in the near future. I wonder how I can engineer now doing this without losing our place in the piece. All right, well, I'm going to note where we stopped at about 1:13 in, and I'll roll it separately off of a different app. So in the meantime, I'm going to have to stop this one and start our break music instead. Okay, so that was poorly planned. I really thought we had the time for that one, and I guess I misread the clock on that. Anyway, how do you like that, by the way? I love the thought that they actually had to stop and consider, what are they going to call people who serve in the Space Force? Right? We have Army, you're a soldier. Navy, you're a sailor. Air Force, you're an airman. You got Coast Guardsmen, you got Marines. What are we going to call our Space Forcers? Space Cadets? No. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio, and we'll try and make amends here and see if I can't use straight up iTunes instead of my soundboard to restart the piece here on the Space Force and then skip ahead to where we left off. Let's see what kind of engineering I can do here. Okay, well now we got this started. We'll start this. That's true. Okay, where's my iTunes? Oh dear, am I not going to be able to do this? Well, we can just comment along instead. How about that? Oh, well, I guess apparently hovering over the... Boy, I really got control of the of iTunes here. Let me see if... do I have... Here's a question. If I open it up in... No. I'm wondering if do I have the whole system audio in this? If I open it up in WavePad... I'm going to have to add that, I think, to things. I wonder if I open it up, if I play it, will I be able to hear it, but will everyone be able to hear it? Let's go see if I can find out. Let's see. Open up this file here. Yeah, I really screwed that one up. So I apologize. Apologies to Darwin for sending us this fun piece on the Space Force and then having me screw it up by getting the wrong timing. Can I play this? Let's see. Just going to check this out. Does this go through? No, I don't think it comes out. Now it's just in my head, which is even worse. Okay. All right. Well, that's a problem, and I apologize for it. And let's see. Maybe the thing to do is we'll give it another shot and roll the whole thing maybe we'll start over tomorrow. How about that? And we'll roll that tomorrow without interruption, as opposed to doing it again now, or what? Unless I can think of a different way of engineering this thing so that we can fast forward through part of it. All right. Maybe the thing to do while I think about this is move on. And, wow, I really apologize for that one. Probably would have been better off just waiting until after the break. But what can you do? Live radio, everybody, makes for a lot of problems. All right. Let's get back on track, if we can, and find some of the other stories that deserve some attention as well. I'm thinking about we might want to head back to the question of exactly what the hell is going on in the Justice Department with Barr bringing in all of these outside U.S. attorneys to try and conduct or reinvestigate things that have had their investigations closed for some time, and what that might actually mean in terms of running these, the integrity, really, safeguarding the integrity of the Justice Department going forward. I think we started on this piece yesterday, and it was the Barr's internal reviews and reinvestigations feed resentment, suspicion inside the Justice Department. And as I'm saying this, of course, and realizing we're beginning by reviewing something we already spoke about or read part of yesterday, I now realize, well, what will be the difference between that and spending a minute or so reviewing what we had already heard about Space Force? And the answer is because it was so close in time, I suppose, it feels less productive to be rerunning the same audio versus reviewing what we did yesterday. Does that make any sense to anybody? I'm not. All right. Anyway, this was the Devlin Barrett, Matt Zapotowski, Josh Dawsey piece from the end of last week about Barr's new practice, new preference for reinvestigating things that had already come to that the DOJ had already concluded its investigations of, but in which the conclusions were not acceptable to Donald Trump, essentially. And that Bill Barr is simply saying, let's reinvent the wheel on these investigations and see if we can't come out with an outcome that Donald Trump will like instead. And there was, of course, the idea that they ought to reinvestigate the origins of the Mueller investigation itself, that Mike Flynn's case perhaps ought to be reconsidered, and not to mention the intervention in the Stone sentencing. So let's see, we had read about Trump asking around for advice on who he should fire at the Department of Justice because he didn't want to fire the people who were busily doing his bidding, and that they landed on Jesse Liu, formerly the U.S. Attorney for D.C., who got promised a job at Treasury and then had that yanked out from under her and also dismissed from DOJ. Then there was the insistence from Trump in his tweets that the DOJ Inspector General had recommended firing Andrew McCabe, which wasn't true, and that he perhaps ought to be looked at again anyway, despite the fact that they had come to the conclusion and that a grand jury had failed to agree that he ought to be indicted and would not hand down an indictment against him. Let's see. There was, yes, the assignment of Jeff Jensen, U.S. Attorney for St. Louis, to review and assist prosecutors currently handling the case of Mike Flynn, currently awaiting sentencing. The Jensen appointment marks the latest iteration of an unusual trend inside the Justice Department of tasking outside U.S. attorneys with reviewing, managing, or reinvestigating work that would otherwise not be in their portfolio. Much of the effort seemed aimed at re-examining the work of Robert Mueller, in particular, whose probe of possible coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign infuriated the president, or at targeting the president's foes. In 2017, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions had appointed U.S. Attorney for Utah John Huber to investigate old corruption allegations against Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, as you know, and Trump's opponent in the 2016 campaign, in case you missed that part, on issues that had been covered previously by other federal prosecutors. That assignment came amid pressure from Republican lawmakers for the appointment of a second special counsel. The next year, the Justice Department tasked the U.S. Attorney in Chicago, John Lausch, to oversee the turnover to Congress of internal FBI documents about Clinton. Last year, Barr tapped Connecticut's U.S. Attorney, John Durham, to investigate how U.S. intelligence agencies investigated Russian interference in the last presidential election. More recently, Barr assigned Scott W. Brady the U.S. Attorney in Pittsburgh to take information from Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who wants to provide the Justice Department with material alleging wrongdoing related to former Vice President Joe Biden and his family. And now, the top federal prosecutor from St. Louis is working on the Flynn case that has long been handled by federal prosecutors in D.C. Taken together, the moves have fueled suspicion inside and outside the department. Such decisions are not unprecedented. In 2009, President Obama's first Attorney General, Eric Holder, expanded an investigation Durham was conducting into the treatment of detained terror suspects. And at the time, many in the intelligence community bristled at the idea that conduct that had been investigated once already would be investigated again. But it is highly unusual to do this as often as the Trump administration has. If this Justice Department had done it once, you might understand. But they've done it over and over. And it's only ever to re-examine an outcome that the president didn't like, said Matthew Miller, a former spokesman for Holder, who said the practice does enormous harm to the department's reputation. When you are constantly launching politically motivated probes, the public can't tell which investigations are legitimate and which are political. That does cause a problem, doesn't it? And ultimately, they question everything. And clearly that is part of the goal. A Justice Department spokeswoman declined to comment. Inside the Justice Department and U.S. attorneys' offices around the country, career employees took a wide range of views on Barr's recent actions, particularly his extraordinary Thursday interview with ABC News when he said Trump's commentary makes it, quote, impossible for me to do my job. Some inside the department were heartened by his remarks. Finally, one career Justice Department employee told the Washington Post, but others were more skeptical, wondering if Barr and Trump had orchestrated the interview as a means to provide the Attorney General with political cover to continue executing influence over the cases Trump has fixated on most. That cynicism only grew deeper when it was revealed new prosecutors had been added to the Flynn case. People close to the Attorney General say his frustration with Trump is genuine, and that Barr had privately expressed his concerns to the president more than once in recent weeks. When those efforts did not seem to have the desired effect, Barr decided to speak out publicly, these people said. Current and former officials said the move to add new prosecutors to the Flynn case seemed to be part of a new pattern of Justice Department political leadership spinning up inquiries that might help Trump and his friends and hurt their perceived foes. David Laufman, a former chief of the Justice Department's Counterintelligence and Export Controls section, said such reviews are enormously demoralizing, certainly for the U.S. Attorney's offices in D.C., and I would imagine throughout the Department of Justice and U.S. Attorney's offices nationwide. Laufman said he was baffled at why the various U.S. attorneys accept such missions. Why would they be associating themselves with investigations that are evocative of the manner in which repressive regimes throughout history have behaved? Representatives for Durham and Jensen didn't respond to questions for this report, and a spokesman for Brady declined to comment. Spokeswoman for Huber also declined to comment. No surprise there that they wouldn't speak up. But an interesting development and overuse of this tactic, and for pretty clearly, it's easy to assume that they're being used for corrupt reasons, and it's very difficult really to provide evidence that it would be used otherwise. So, rather difficult to navigate and demoralizing for the department. There's more in a similar vein, I guess. It's not just, the department that the Department of Justice that has got this problem. There is also an effort underway, which has been problematic and known for some time, of course, in Trump's war against the intelligence community. Let me share this one here from the New York Times. Always worth checking in with Charlie Savage, who wrote this piece with Adam Goldman and Julian Barnes. Justice Department has got another investigation going on. They're investigating CIA resistance to sharing Russia secrets. And this one becomes extraordinarily dangerous, I think. The prosecutor was assigned by the Attorney General to scrutinize the agents and analysts who sought to understand Russia's covert operation to help Donald J. Trump win the 2016 election. It could be that this is really a rather thinly disguised effort to have the Justice Department look into, can we prosecute the intelligence community functionaries who made and executed the decision to check into whether or not Trump's campaign was in contact with, being influenced by, being helped by Russia or Russian agents. They just wanted to know whether that was true. They caught the assignment. They looked into it. And now, like with Vindman, he wants to see people prosecuted for the crime of believing that he might have done something that's worth checking into. The Trump administration officials investigating the government's response to Russia's election interference in 2016 appear to be hunting for a basis to accuse Obama-era intelligence officials of hiding evidence or manipulating analysis about Moscow's covert operation, according to people familiar with aspects of the inquiry. And before I even get into the rest of the article, what makes this so dangerous is, of course, the likelihood that you will bump any inquiry, whether an official inquiry or an outside inquiry through the press, will bump into claims that you cannot have the information you seek because national security, which lends itself all too easily to, well, what's being covered up here sorts of accusations. And if it's coming from the current government, that's extraordinarily dangerous. Since his election, President Trump has attacked the intelligence agencies that concluded that Russia secretly tried to help him win, fostering a narrative that they sought to delegitimize his victory. He has long promoted the investigation by John Durham, the prosecutor examining their actions, as a potential pathway to proving that a deep state cabal conspired against him. Questions asked by Mr. Durham, who was assigned by Attorney General William Barr to scrutinize the early actions of law enforcement and intelligence officials struggling to understand the scope of Russia's scheme, suggest that Mr. Durham may have come to view with suspicion several clashes between analysts at different intelligence agencies over who could see each other's highly sensitive secrets, the people said. Mr. Durham appears to be pursuing a theory that the CIA, under its former director, John Brennan, had a preconceived notion about Russia or was trying to get to a particular result and was nefariously trying to keep other agencies from seeing the full picture, lest they interfere with that goal, the people said. But officials from the FBI and the National Security Agency have told Mr. Durham and his investigators that such an interpretation is wrong and based on a misunderstanding of how the intelligence community functions, the people said. Not that they would buy into that, too nuanced for them. National security officials are typically cautious about sharing their most delicate information, like source identities, even with other agencies inside the executive branch. Mr. Durham's questioning is certain to add to accusations that Mr. Trump is using the Justice Department to go after his perceived enemies, like Mr. Brennan, who has been an outspoken critic of the president. Mr. Barr, who is overseeing the investigation, has come under attack in recent days over senior Justice Department officials' intervention to lighten a prison sentencing recommendation by lower-level prosecutors for Mr. Trump's longtime friend and co-conspirator, Roger Stone. A spokesman for Mr. Durham declined to comment. The CIA and the National Security Agency also declined to comment. People familiar with aspects of Mr. Durham's investigation spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the sensitive topic. Appearing on MSNBC's Hardball on Thursday evening, Mr. Brennan was asked to respond to this article. He both dismissed Mr. Durham's apparent line of inquiry and portrayed it as dangerous. It's kind of silly, Mr. Brennan said. Is there a criminal investigation now on analytic judgments and the activities of the CIA in terms of trying to protect our national security? I'm certainly willing to talk to Mr. Durham or anybody else who has any questions about what we did during this period of 2016. But Mr. Brennan added, it's clearly, I think, it's another indication that Donald Trump is using the Department of Justice to go after his enemies any way he can. The Durham investigation has rattled current and former intelligence officers. Little precedent exists for a criminal prosecutor to review the analytic judgment-making process of intelligence agencies, said Michael Morrell, former acting CIA director who left the government in 2013. The whole thing is so abnormal, he said. Prosecutors are ill-equipped to assess how analysts work, he added. The bar for making a legal judgment is really high. The bar for making an analytic decision is much lower, Mr. Morrell said. So he is going to get the wrong answer if he tries to figure out if they had enough information to make this judgment. But other intelligence officials, according to an American official, are reserving judgment about Mr. Durham, who previously spent years investigating the CIA over its torture program and its destruction of interrogation videotapes without charging anyone with a crime. 2 detainees died in the agency's custody. And here an excellent point is made. It's not that you can't investigate the CIA and analysts. It is extraordinarily difficult. It could become dangerous, not usually for the same reasons that in my view anyway, that the intelligence agencies hold up. They say, of course, it's dangerous to investigate us because getting in our way endangers national security all by itself. And that seems like a bit of a dodge, and especially not one certainly that would be acceptable to us when they were investigating the torture programs and why they destroyed all the evidence of the torture programs. That's just nonsense. But it does become dangerous in the sense that you will run into roadblocks in filling in the evidentiary gap. And if you are an investigator working for Donald Trump, who is so inclined at intentionally misreading all sorts of signals, whether they rise to the level of being legitimate evidence or not, and doing so on purpose, for the purpose of driving a false and sometimes completely crazy narrative in the public mind, you just know that those situations are going to present themselves, and that you'll have the commonly shared dodge or conspiracy theorists' favorite of, the CIA, of course, is going to block that information because they don't want you to know. Well, they don't want you to know, but for different reasons. Very interesting in this case. All right. Mr. Durham is a longtime federal prosecutor who has repeatedly been asked under administrations of both parties to investigate accusations of wrongdoing by law enforcement and intelligence agencies. So maybe he's better suited to a question like this. It's possible. Mr. Trump appointed him as the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut in 2018. The Justice Department has declined to talk about Mr. Durham's work in meaningful detail, but he has been said to be interested in how the intelligence community came up with its analytical judgments, including its assessment that Russia was not merely sowing discord, but specifically sought to help Trump defeat Clinton in the election. The Justice Department Inspector General, who released the results late last year of an inquiry into aspects of the FBI's Russia investigation, found no documentary or testimonial evidence senior law enforcement and officials had engaged in a high-level conspiracy to sabotage Trump, the narrative the president and his supporters continue to embrace. Durham questions shed additional light on where he may be going. In recent months, Durham and his team have examined emails among a small group of intelligence analysts from multiple agencies, including the CIA, FBI, and NSA, who worked together to assess the Russian operation. Investigators have interviewed those analysts and their supervisors, about the motivations behind several episodes in which some sought access to delicate information from other agencies and were told, initially at least, that they could not see it. One fight, they said, concerned the identity and placement of a CIA source inside the Kremlin. Analysts at the NSA wanted to know more about him to weigh the credibility of his information. The CIA was initially reluctant to share details about the Russian's identity, but eventually relented. But officials disagreed about how much weight to give the source's information, and the intelligence community's eventual assessment apparently reflected that division. While the FBI and CIA concluded with high confidence that President Putin of Russia was specifically trying to help Trump win the election, the NSA agreed, but said it only had moderate confidence. The informant and his family were extracted from Russia, this is the one we heard about, in 2017 and resettled in the United States. Notably, the source had initially refused to leave when American officials proposed getting him out for his own safety, raising suspicions about whether he might be a double agent. It's not clear whether Durham has interviewed that informant. A second fight that Durham has focused on centered on a certain data set. The nature of the data and the dispute remains unclear, though one person suggested the disagreement concerned whether NSA analysts could see the raw information, or whether the CIA, before sharing it, needed to filter the data to mask names and other identifying details about Americans and American organizations. The filtering process is a routine part of how spy agencies share foreign intelligence with each other under guidelines imposed by the Attorney General. The rules permit exceptions in cases where the identities are necessary to understand the information, which can lead to disputes about whether that standard has been met. Officials also differed over access to unclassified emails of American officials that the Russian government had previously hacked, including at the White House and the State Department. A foreign ally's intelligence service had obtained its own copy of the stolen messages and provided drives with another reproduction of them to the United States government. Investigators, including the FBI, wanted to look at those files. They argued that the Russian hackers' chosen focus while the Kremlin's election interference operation was gearing up might shed light on that operation. But an index of the messages compiled by the unnamed foreign ally showed that they included emails from President Barack Obama, as well as members of Congress. Mr. Obama's White House counsel, Neil Eggleston, decided that investigators should not open the drives, citing executive privilege and the possibility of a separation of powers uproar if the FBI sifted through lawmakers' private messages. One problem in making sense of these disputes between the intelligence agencies nearly 4 years later, several people said, is that officials did not caveat their emails with detailed descriptions of their motivations and rationales for balking. That has left the messages open to multiple potential readings. The analysts could have been engaged in standard bureaucratic behavior like obeying the filtering process or hoarding sensitive information. Or perhaps they were trying to cover something up. The questions asked by Mr. Durham and his team suggest they are looking for any potential basis to support making the latter reading, officials said. Mr. Durham also asked questions that appeared aimed at understanding how analysts reached their conclusions and who drove that process, the people said, and whether and how information from foreign governments or the CIA played any role in stoking suspicions at the FBI about Trump campaign links to Russia. Standards issued by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence require analysts to follow procedures aimed at ensuring objective, neutral, and independent evaluation of the facts. Mr. Durham has interviewed FBI officials and agents who worked at the Bureau's Russia investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, and for the special counsel who took over the inquiry, that's Mueller. They have also interviewed CIA analysts. Mr. Durham and his team also interviewed around half a dozen current and former officials and analysts at NSA, including its former director, retired Admiral Michael Rogers, last summer and again last fall. The Intercept first reported those interviews of Admiral Rogers. But Mr. Durham has not interviewed the former FBI director, James Comey, his one-time deputy, Andrew McCabe, or Mr. Brennan. Durham has requested Brennan's emails, call logs, and other documents from the CIA to learn what he told other officials, including Mr. Comey, about his and the CIA's views of a notorious dossier, you know all about it, about Russia and Trump associates. Mr. Trump has targeted all three former top officials as he sought to foster a narrative that it was illegitimate for government investigators to scrutinize links between his campaign, Russia, and WikiLeaks, and that he was the victim of a deep state conspiracy to sabotage him for political reasons, a push that led to the Durham inquiry. So do you see what the danger is here? Among all the other dangers previously named, what you've got, if you buy into the Intelligence Committee's initial assessment, is the person assessed to have been in coordination with the Russians to undermine our elections, is now demanding access to the CIA's files about how they discovered this Russian interference in the first place. And it's a little bit worrisome, the idea of turning over the CIA's possible information about how it was that they discovered the Russians' sources and methods, and handing it to a person who's suspected, at least, of sharing valuable and sensitive information with the Russians. In other words, could it just be that Durham is working, probably unwittingly on his part, to dislodge the information about how the CIA discovered that the Russians were doing this and established it as fact, and handing it over to the Russians so that they don't make the same mistake in 2020? How do you tell the difference
From
between
Daily
that
Co's
and
Radio
what's really happening?
On netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, apologies again to our friend Darwin Darko for me interrupting his beautiful presentation of the Stars and Stripes story. We'll give it a shot again tomorrow and catch up with all the other contributors, Serena Blaze and Eric Postman, who have all been waiting in the wings to share what they have with you. Next, Justice Putnam.